Welcome back to the show. Today, we are turning our attention to a subject that looms, well, incredibly large over the history of music.
It really does.
We are talking about Pink Floyd. This is a band that has sold over 250 million records worldwide.
Yeah, and that includes 75 million certified units just in the United States.
I mean, that's a staggering number.
It is. To put that in perspective, they are firmly among the best-selling music artists of all time. But, beyond the sales figures, what makes this exploration so compelling is the narrative arc of the band itself.
Right.
It's a story defined by two distinct eras and a massive, decades-long power struggle.
Absolutely. You have the early psychedelic genius of Syd Barrett, followed by his decline, and then the conceptual dominance of Roger Waters, which eventually leads to the leadership of David Gilmour.
And it's a band that created albums about empathy, about madness, about communication.
Yet, they suffered from a total breakdown of communication between themselves.
That irony is really the central tension we need to examine. Our goal here is to understand the complete biography of the band right up to the present day.
And we're drawing on extensive biographical records, chart history, documented interviews.
Right, to uncover details the average listener might not know. I mean, from their origins as architecture students all the way to legal battles over flying pigs.
And we're going to trace the evolution of their sound, the philosophical themes of their lyrics, and of course, those personal conflicts that fueled their greatest work and in the end, tore them apart.
So let's start at the beginning.
So let's unpack this, starting right at the beginning. It turns out the foundation of Pink Floyd isn't in a music conservatory, but in a polytechnic.
That is correct. In 1962, Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright were all studying architecture at the London Polytechnic at Regent Street.
And that architectural background, it seems relevant, doesn't it?
It's actually quite relevant.
Yeah.
Later on, critics and even the band members themselves would describe their music using structural terms. They built soundscapes. They didn't just write songs.
They didn't start as Pink Floyd, obviously. They went through a whole carousel of names.
Oh, yes. Sigma 6, the Megadeths.
The Screaming Abdabs.
Eventually, they settled on the T-set for a while.
And the lineup was pretty fluid in those early days.
Very. Syd Barrett, who was a childhood friend of Roger Waters, joined in 1963. He was studying art at the Camberwell College of Arts, so he brought this very different artistic energy.
A different perspective.
A totally different perspective. Nick Mason even noted that while everyone else was trying to be cool in that sort of adolescent way, Syd was just unfashionably outgoing.
The name Pink Floyd itself came from Syd Barrett, didn't it?
It did. It was a complete spur-of-the-moment decision. They were booked to play a gig, and they found out another band on the bill was also called the T-set.
Oh, you can't have that.
Ew. So Syd, thinking fast, just combined the names of two Piedmont blues musicians he had in his record collection, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council.
And it stuck.
It stuck. Initially, they were the Pink Floyd sound, but they dropped the sound pretty quickly. They became a staple of London's underground scene, especially at places like the UFO Club.
And their sound was evolving rapidly.
It was. It was rooted in R&B, but they started doing these long, extended improvisations.
That improvisation, that was born out of necessity, wasn't it?
It was, completely. They were playing these marathon sets at the Countdown Club, 3 sets, 90 minutes each, from late night until the early morning.
So to avoid just playing the same songs over and over.
They realized they could just extend them with lengthy solos. So this necessity really birthed their entire style. And they started using rudimentary light shows, too. Colored slides and domestic lights, which became a signature of their performances.
They were also innovating with sound technology from very, very early on. We have to mention the azimuth coordinator.
Ah, yes. This was a joystick-operated quadraphonic device. It was very ahead of its time.
So what did it do?
It allowed the controller, usually Richard Wright, to project the sound, to move it 270 degrees around the venue. They used it at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in 1967.
So the sound would literally be swirling around the audience.
It would swirl. It was confusing and delightful for the crowds. It really shows that their obsession with sonic quality and spatial audio started right at the very beginning.
So by 1967, they're getting noticed. They signed with EMI.
They do. They got a £5,000 advance, which is decent money back then, and they released Arnold Lane, a song about a crossdresser.
Which got banned by several radio stations.
It did, but it still charted.
Yeah.
Then came See Emily Play, and of course their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
And that was recorded at Abbey Road Studios.
Right next door to the Beatles, funnily enough, while they were recording Lovely Rita for Slank Pepper.
Wow.
But Piper is the only album that was really made under Syd Barrett's leadership. It's whimsical, it's psychedelic, it's chaotic. But as their fame rose, Syd's mental state was deteriorating.
And deteriorating rapidly.
Rapidly. A lot of it attributed to his excessive LSD use.
The stories from this period are, they're just heartbreaking. There's the famous blank stare.
Right. They were on their first U.S. tour in late '67, appearing on the Pat Boone Show. And Syd just refused to move his lips during the mimed performance, just stared blankly into the camera.
And on stage, it was even worse sometimes.
Oh, yeah. He would sometimes just stand there and detune his guitar until the strings were completely slack, making it impossible for the rest of the band to follow him.
It became a crisis.
A total crisis. And there's one specific story that I think really illustrates the tragedy of his decline. He brought a new song to practice called Have You Got It Yet?
Okay.
And he would teach it to the band, but every single time they started playing it, he would change the structure or the melody or the chords, and he just kept singing, Have You Got It Yet?
And they would say no.
They'd say no. And eventually, Roger Waters realized Syd was doing it on purpose. He was deliberately making it impossible to learn. It was just this profound sign of his total unraveling.
So the band needed a solution, and fast.
They did. In December of 1967, they hired David Gilmour. He was an old friend of Syd's from Cambridge.
And the initial plan wasn't to replace Syd, was it?
No, the initial plan was for a 5-person lineup. The idea was that Syd could stay home and write, sort of like Brian Wilson did with the Beach Boys, and Gilmour would be the one to perform live.
But that proved unworkable.
Very, very quickly. The deciding moment, the real final straw, happened in January 1968. The band was in the van, driving to a show in Southampton, and someone in the van just asked, shall we pick up Syd? And the response, it's been attributed to different members, but it was likely a collective feeling, was just, nah, let's not bother.
Wow. Let's not bother. That's such a brutal, quiet end to an era.
It is. Syd officially departed in April 1968, and this left a massive vacuum. Waters had to take over the lyrical direction, Gilmour took over the vocals and the main guitar duties. They had to find a completely new identity.
Right. Who are we without our visionary?
Exactly. And that transition period from about 1968 to 1972 was fraught with experimentation. They were just, trying to figure out who they were without their main songwriter.
Their second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, seems like that transition point.
It is. It's the only album with all 5 members on it, technically. And it includes Syd's final contribution, Jug Band Blues.
And the lyrics to that song.
They are just haunting. He sings, "It's awfully considerate of you to think of me here, and I'm most obliged to you for making it clear that I'm not here. It's an unbelievably self-aware farewell."
After that, they really started exploring. They followed it with Ummagumma in 1969.
Which was a very strange double album, half live recordings, and the other half was dedicated to solo experiments by each band member. Some of it works, some of it really doesn't.
And then Adam Hart Mother in 1970.
This was their first #1 album in the UK, a huge success. It featured a full choir and heavy orchestration by Ron Geeson, but famously, the band didn't like it in retrospect.
No, they didn't, did they?
Not at all. Roger Waters later said he would prefer if it were thrown into the dustbin and never listened to by anyone ever again.
And Gilmour.
He called it a load of rubbish. But despite their own criticism, it showed their ambition was massive. And during this time, they were also doing a lot of soundtrack work.
For films like More, Zabriskie Point, La Volée.
Correct. And that soundtrack work was practical, right?
Extremely practical. It paid well, for one thing. And it allowed them to experiment without the pressure of having to create a pop hit. It literally paid for the new equipment they were using to develop their sound.
The real turning point, though, seems to be the album Metal in 1971.
I would agree.
Specifically, that one track, Echoes.
Echoes is essential. It takes up the entire second side of the vinyl. This is the moment where they found the signature Pink Floyd sound.
What is that sound, though? How would you define it?
It's long, sweet-like compositions with philosophical lyrics, these extended instrumental passages, and they were using technology in new ways.
Right, like the Binson Eckrich delay unit and the EMS VCS3 synthesizer to create these incredible textures. This era also gave us live at Pompeii.
The concert film, recorded in an empty Roman amphitheater.
It remains visually iconic, and it really captures that moment where they had found their footing post-Syd.
Which sets the stage for what we might call the golden era, 1973.
The dark side of the moon.
This is where everything's coalesced.
It did. The concept was about the pressures of modern lifetime, money, war, insanity. It was a single, cohesive piece of art, not just a collection of songs.
And they recorded it at Abbey Road with engineer Alan Parsons.
Their perfectionism during these sessions was at an all-time high. I read that the band, well, everyone except for Wright, actually boycotted their own press release reception.
Why?
Because the quadraphonic mix wasn't ready, and they refused to let the critics hear it on a poor-quality stereo PA system.
That is dedication to the audio experience.
It is, and the public responded in a way nobody could have predicted. The Dark Side of the Moon is one of the most commercially successful albums in history.
The numbers are just mind-boggling. It stayed on the Billboard charts for over 14 years.
741 consecutive weeks.
And it sold, 45 million copies?
Around 45 million copies worldwide. This changed their lives overnight. They went from being a respected, underground art rock band to buying country houses and collecting expensive cars.
But that kind of massive success, it brings massive pressure.
Inevitably.
And their next album, Wish You Were Here, from 1975, deals directly with that pressure.
It does. The central theme of the album is absence.
Absence of Syd.
The absence of Syd, absolutely. The title track, and especially Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, are direct tributes to him. But there's also a very biting critique of the music industry in songs like Have a Cigar and Welcome to the Machine.
That line, which one's pink and have a cigar,
Yeah.
that was based on a real question, wasn't it?
It was. It was a question asked by an actual, very ignorant record executive, which just perfectly encapsulated how disconnected the business side was from the art.
There's a story from the recording sessions of Wish You Were Here that, it gives me chills every time I hear it. The Syd's Visit anecdote.
It is truly haunting. It was June 1975. The band is in the studio. They're mixing Shine on You Crazy Diamond, the song written about Syd.
Right.
And suddenly this heavy-set man with a completely shaved head and shaved eyebrows just appears in the control room. He was even carrying a plastic bag.
And they didn't know who he was.
No one recognized him at first. They thought he was a cleaner or maybe a friend of the staff.
And it was Syd.
It was Syd Barrett. He had changed so much physically, he was almost unrecognizable. When they finally realized who it was, Roger Waters was reportedly reduced to tears.
What did Syd do?
He just sort of sat there for a bit. He listened to the track they were mixing, his tribute, and he said it sounded a bit old.
A bit old.
Yeah. And then he just left. He briefly attended David Gilmour's wedding reception that same day, which was happening on the studio lot, and then he just disappeared again. It was the last time most of the band ever saw him.
The fact that he appeared on that day while they were recording that song.
It's one of those coincidences that feels almost supernatural. It's just an incredibly sad, powerful moment in their story.
Moving on from that into the late 70s, the dynamic in the band really began to shift, didn't it?
It did. Roger Waters started taking more and more control, and this leads us directly to Animals in 1977.
A very different album.
A very angry album. It's loosely based on George Orwell's Animal Farm. Waters divided society into three classes: dogs, who are the ruthless capitalists; pigs, the corrupt moralists and politicians; and sheep, the mindless herd.
The cover art for Animals is legendary. The flying pig over Battersea Power Station.
And that shoot was a disaster in the best possible way.
What happened?
They commissioned this enormous 30-foot inflatable pig. On the second day of the shoot, the pig broke loose from its mooring.
Oh, no.
And it floated directly into the flight path of Heathrow Airport, causing flights to be grounded. It eventually landed in a farmer's field out in Kent. The farmer was apparently furious because it had scared his cows.
You can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. But behind the scenes, though, the tension in the band was mounting. A big part of it was financial.
The royalties.
The royalties, they were split by songwriting credits. And since Waters was now writing almost all the lyrics and devising the core concepts, he was making significantly more money than Gilmour or Wright.
And that creates resentment.
It bred a lot of resentment. And the tour for Animals, the In the Flesh tour, was apparently just miserable for them. They were playing these massive stadiums, and Waters felt completely alienated from the audience.
He felt they weren't listening.
He felt they were just there to drink and scream. And this culminated in the famous spitting incident at the Montreal Olympic Stadium.
Right. He actually spat on a fan.
He got so annoyed by a noisy fan in the front row that he just spat in the fan's face.
And that moment of alienation, that act of spitting on a fan, that actually inspired the next album.
Exactly. Waters wanted to build a literal wall between himself and the audience. And so you get The Wall, released in 1979, a rock opera about a character named Pink who builds a mental wall to isolate himself.
And it's deeply personal for Waters.
Very. It deals with the loss of his father in the war, an overbearing mother, abusive school teachers, all these bricks in his wall.
The production of The Wall was the breaking point for the band's lineup, though. Roger Waters actually fired Richard Wright during the recording.
He did. Waters felt Wright wasn't contributing enough, wasn't pulling his weight. So he presented an ultimatum. Either Wright could leave the partnership quietly, or Waters would scrap the entire album and effectively bankrupt the band.
So Wright was forced out?
He was. He agreed to leave, but he was hired back as a salaried musician for the tour.
Which led to a supreme irony, didn't it?
It's one of the great ironies in rock history. The tour costs were so astronomical they had to build this massive wall on stage every single night that the band lost money on it.
Right.
Because Wright was on a fixed wage, a salary, he was the only member of Pink Floyd who actually made a profit from the Wall live shows.
That is incredible. And of course, The Wall also became a movie.
Yes, directed by Alan Parker and starring Bob Geldof as Pink.
Who initially didn't want the role.
Famously, he called the script bollocks when he first read it, but he took the role, and it's iconic. It's a mix of live action and that incredible animation by Gerald Scarfe.
So by 1983, the cracks are just chasms. We get the final cut.
Which is often described as essentially a Roger Waters solo album featuring the other members.
And that's fair.
For all intents and purposes, it was. The tension was at an absolute all-time high. Gilmour was stripped of his producer credits. He felt the songs were just duff tracks that had been rejected from the Wall.
And it's a very political album.
Highly political. A direct critique of the Falklands War and Margaret Thatcher, dedicated to his father who died in World War II. It was Waters' vision, completely unfiltered.
And then the split. In 1985, Roger Waters officially resigned.
He did. He believed the band was a spent force. He resigned and just assumed that would be the end of Pink Floyd.
But Gilmour and Mason had other ideas.
They decided to carry on, which of course triggered a massive legal battle. Waters sued to dissolve the partnership and prevent them from ever using the name Pink Floyd again.
It got nasty.
It was incredibly nasty. Gilmour and Mason had to fight to keep the name. It got to the point where they actually had to put up Nick Mason's Ferrari 250 GTO as collateral.
His actual Ferrari.
His actual very valuable Ferrari as collateral to fund the tour for their next album because promoters were so scared of the lawsuits.
A Ferrari as collateral. That is high stakes.
It is. But they eventually won. On Christmas Eve 1987, a settlement was reached. Gilmour and Mason could use the name Pink Floyd.
And what did Waters get?
Waters retained the rights to the wall concept and, importantly, the inflatable pig design.
Which led to a rather funny detail on the next tour.
It did. When the new Gilmour-led version of the band wanted to use a pig on tour, they had to modify the design to avoid copyright infringement.
So what did they do?
They added huge testicles to their pig. The legal argument was that by adding testicles, it was now a distinct and new design, different from Waters' sow.
You just have to admire the pettiness sometimes. So the Gilmour-led era begins. They released A Momentary Lapse of Reason in 1987.
That's right. It was largely recorded on Gilmour's houseboat, the Astoria.
And Waters' reaction was predictable.
He called it a clever forgery. He was not a fan.
And Richard Wright came back for this album.
He did, but initially as a paid musician earning, I believe, $11,000 a week. There were legal clauses that prevented him from rejoining as a full member immediately. He was fully reinstated later on.
Then in 1994, we get The Division Bell.
The theme of this album was communication, or rather, the lack of it, which is incredibly fitting given the band's entire history.
And this album campaign had a very interesting feature, the Publius Enigma.
It did. This was a very early internet mystery. A user calling themselves Publius posted cryptic riddles on Pink Floyd newsgroups promising some kind of prize.
And this is from the band.
It was orchestrated by the record company. It was a marketing gimmick, but it showed they were still engaging with new technology and that sense of mystery. And the album was a huge success. #1 in the UK, in the US, and the tour was the highest grossing in history at that time.
After 1994, the band went quiet for a very long time. But in 2005, we got the reunion everyone said would never, ever happen.
Live 8.
Live 8. And it was Bob Geldof who made it happen.
Bob Geldof, who had played Pink in the movie, convinced them to reunite for the charity event. It was the first time Waters, Gilmour, Mason, and Wright had played together in 24 years.
The atmosphere must have been tense.
The rehearsals were apparently very tense. There were arguments over tempo, song choices, everything. But the performance itself was magic.
I remember watching it.
And at the end, there was that group hug. Waters even commented that the animosity of the past was unimportant in the context of the cause they were supporting. It felt like a thaw.
But sadly, that was the final time the classic lineup would ever be together. Syd Barrett died in 2006.
He did. He died of pancreatic cancer and complications from diabetes. He lived a very quiet life in Cambridge, just gardening and painting, completely removed from the fame he helped create.
And then Richard Wright passed away in 2008.
Also from cancer, Gilmour paid a really lovely tribute, calling him the vital, magical component of the Pink Floyd sound, and his death really marked the definitive end of the band as a touring entity.
They did release one final album in 2014, The Endless River,
Which was constructed from ambient recordings and outtakes made during the Division Bell sessions in 93 and 94.
so it was a posthumous tribute to Wright.
It was intended as exactly that, a tribute to Rick Wright, a final swan song.
Now that brings us to the more recent history. And you might think that with the band effectively over, the feuds would finally die down.
But that is not the case at all.
Not even close.
No. In 2018, Nick Mason formed a band called Nick Mason's Saucer Full of Secrets to play the very early pre-Dark Side material.
Which is great for fans of that era.
It is. And Roger Waters actually joined him on stage once in New York, which was a nice, positive moment. But then came 2022.
And the invasion of Ukraine.
This became a major flashpoint. In 2022, Pink Floyd released their first new music in decades, a single called Hey, Hey, Rise Up.
A protest song?
A protest song against the Russian invasion. It featured vocals by a Ukrainian singer, Andrei Klivenik, taken from an Instagram video of him singing in the streets of Kiev.
But Roger Waters did not participate in this.
He did not. In fact, Waters refused to condemn the invasion and was highly critical of the song and Western involvement. This deepened the rift between him and Gilmour significantly.
And it spilled over very publicly onto social media in 2023. This is the so-called Twitter war.
It was incredibly public and very personal. Polly Sampson, who is David Gilmour's wife and the band's lyricist during the later years, tweeted directly at Roger Waters.
And she didn't hold back.
Not at all. She called him anti-Semitic to his rotten core and a Putin apologist, among other very strong insults. And then David Gilmour himself quoted the tweet and added, "Every word demonstrably true."
That feels like a point of no return.
It certainly seems so.
Sure.
And amidst all this personal animosity, Waters decided to re-record The Dark Side of the Moon as a solo project in 2023.
Right, Dark Side Redux.
And he stripped away all the iconic rock solos, the guitar solos, to focus on his own spoken word poetry over the top. It was a very polarizing move, to say the least.
Finally, that brings us to the business conclusion of the band's history. Just recently, in October 2024.
Yes. After years of speculation, the band agreed to sell their recorded music catalog as well as their name and likeness rights to Sony Music.
And the deal was worth a lot.
Approximately $400 million.
But there was a key exclusion, right?
A very important one. The songwriting rights, the publishing, were not included. They kept those separate. But the recordings themselves, the master tapes, now belong to Sony.
And Gilmour was quite clear about why he wanted to sell.
He was. He stated he wanted to be rid of the decision-making and, more importantly, the arguments involved in keeping the business going. He described it as a way to get out of the mud bath of band politics for good.
Looking ahead to 2025, there's already a 4K restoration of Live at Pompeii, and the soundtrack album became their 7th UK #1. So the legacy continues to sell, even if the band has ceased to exist.
It's a truly remarkable journey. I mean, from the psychedelic underground of London to global stadium dominance.
It is the ultimate duality, isn't it? They created music that is so deeply about empathy, about us and them, about breaking down walls.
And yet the band members themselves suffered from a total catastrophic breakdown of communication.
It's the core irony of their entire story.
It really is. But despite all the feuds, the lawsuits, the Twitter wars, the artifacts remain. The prism, the wall, the pig, the diamond. These have become monumental cultural symbols that transcend the men who made them.
A fascinating story of creative genius and human frailty.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.